In this very exciting video, we're going to be talking about the theme of expansion and contraction in meditation. And the reason I'm making this video is because I am super excited about it right now. And it is extremely useful for everyone, from the first time literally that you sit down and meditate to a more advanced meditator that's been meditating for years, because it can really shift your experience from one of an observer having things happen to you to just the absolute state of flow. And it can take you, as has been happening with me lately, which is why I'm so excited, to places of consciousness where you're just bubbling with excitement and your whole body's tingling with this sense of a huge insight into the nature of reality. So I'm very excited about it, but a full disclaimer here that I learned this from someone called Shinzen Young, which is also on YouTube and actually has a YouTube channel called Expand Contract, and he has multiple videos on this topic. So I'm going to link to that in the description, and I extremely highly encourage everyone to go look at his channel. Having said that, in this video I'm going to be trying to add some further perspectives, some of my experiences, and not go over what he's said on his channel, but try and bring something new to the table. But again, Shinzen Young, he has half a century more meditation experience than me, and he's been teaching people for decades. So I can't stress enough how much I encourage you to go check out his entire YouTube channel. But for a little bit of extra flavor, let's now jump in to this video and start with what is the theme of expansion and contraction. So let's try and talk about everything I want to in one take, because that will be a nice challenge for me. So first of all, very basically, what is expansion and contraction? And it's a very ordinary thing. If you just touch your own palm, for instance, you can notice as you're doing so, there is an arising of a sensation. But as your finger is running across and you let go, that perception, that sensation immediately disappears again, and just this very basic arisal and passing of any perception is the theme of expansion and contraction. And if you're careful, you can notice that all perceptions, every single one, has this quality. Now, it's kind of obvious in a sense, but you can apply some nuance and clarity to it. For instance, noticing if you're meditating that a back pain that you might have is not actually as constant as you might think at first, but instead it slowly arises, and then there's dips and falls and dips and falls, and there are peaks for sure, but then as you get distracted, perhaps the pain subsides. And it's just very interesting to notice the nuance involved and to see the flow of the expansion and contraction happening, not just to recognize that, oh yeah, of course, when I touch something, there is an expansion of perception and then a contraction. But if you apply some clarity and look for the nuance, it can be very interesting to see the actual flowing of the expansion and contraction. So I hope that makes sense. Now, as I mentioned, all perceptions have this quality. Every single sense, whether internal or external. So obviously hearing has this quality, touch has this quality, taste and smell has this quality, but so do internal thoughts. For instance, if you think right now of a pink elephant, that thought was actually an expansion of a pink elephant in your mind, and then at some point that thought will contract and there will be no more image in your head of a pink elephant. But if you keep paying close attention to this expansion and contraction, what becomes clear to your mind is that every single form that is created, for instance, this pink elephant, it is a subjectively created experience that your mind creates. It builds it up from smaller building blocks. And if you're, for instance, watching a story, of course, the information is being fed to you, but your mind is creating every single form that you perceive, every single thing, anything that you can label, your mind has created that. And this becomes extremely obvious if you're noticing expansions and contractions. So for instance, at first you might just see a chair, but if you've been doing this this practice for a while, you might literally be looking to the right and then you look to the left, and then you can see the expansion space in your head of a chair being formed. So yeah, I hope this still makes sense. But then the deeper reality, if you notice that your mind is subjectively creating everything you perceive, is that there is a deeper truth of reality, which is the expansion and contraction, because it's a very primordial flow of energy. It's something that's just there. It's a being, it's a happening. It's not a creation or a forming of something like an illusion. And this is very important because, for instance, you can notice that practical things like political beliefs have absolutely zero basis in reality. They are entirely formed by our minds. And that also includes religious and spiritual ideas. Any spiritual idea is a formation within the mind, and it is not the actual absolute truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is what's actually just truly happening deeper than the actual forms, which is the expansion and contraction of the forms, of the beliefs. So the belief that there is a God, for instance, that's, if you pay careful attention, it is, you've got some image associated with God, or some thought, or some sound, or some feeling associated with God, and that's an arising and a passing. So yeah, if you're paying attention, the arising and the passing is the truth, but the congealed conglomeration of the thought God is not the truth. So I hope that makes sense. It's a pretty basic topic that maybe was very complex by looking at it through these eyes of expansion and contraction, but it really becomes very tangible if you stick with this practice. So another really fantastic trick with this exercise is to practice what's called equanimity, which is to allow expansion and contraction to happen, to allow this flow to happen without interfering with it at all. So for instance, if you're meditating, you might have a flow of, oh, I need to go wash the car later. And then maybe, usually you would be like, oh, no, I'm meditating. I'm not going to allow that thought to go further. I'm just going to stop thinking about washing the car, and then you return to normal. But if you're practicing equanimity, what you're doing is you're noticing the thought of, I need to wash the car, come up, and you're not stopping it. You're just observing that as you had the thought, I need to wash my car, you can notice, oh, there's an arising of something called an I. An I, which is like an image, there's a sound associated with it, there's a feeling associated in the body. All of those things arise together, conglomerate, and then contract again. And that happens with the I. Kneading is like a feeling that arises. Washing, that's like visual space, and some more ideas in your mind will expand. And then if you need to wash the car, of course, that's another expansion and then a contraction. So you're just noticing the thought forms being constructed without interfering with the thought forms at all, and noticing the underlying true nature of expansion and contraction. So yeah, I hope this still makes sense. As I'm talking about this, I'm realizing how abstract it is. But something else I really want to emphasize, which is important for any spiritual path, is that I've just touched upon. It is that noticing that thoughts of I and me are also expansions and contractions. So if you think I need to go wash my car, those are all interesting to notice how the thought forms expand into creation. But particularly you can notice that the I aspect of it is just exactly as the car aspect, an expansion and a contraction of empty substance. Before you had the thought I, there was no I. The same void that the thought of a car expands from is the void that you expand from. And when the thought of a car goes away into nothingness, that's also where the thought of I goes, when you stop thinking about I. So yeah, this is quite abstract, but what it reveals is the true nature of no self. There is no I. If you just look at yourself now, you're like, of course I exist. But if you look more carefully, you'll notice that what part of I is permanent? The thought I is not permanent. I'm not thinking about I for a lot of time. Even my body, the perceptions of my body are not permanent. A lot of the times I'm not consciously perceiving my body. So if you stick with this practice, you just notice it will become more and more and more and more clear that the I and the me is just a concept. So when in this state of no self, when you can really, really see it clearly, and you're just seeing the expansion and contraction of energy, you can sort of fall into a black hole of some kind, or a void, or an ocean of emptiness, which is counterintuitively not a depressing place, but it's very springy, very energizing, very blissful, and very loving. That's what arises when you notice that. Well, when you notice the arising and passing, what you can see is that there's a deeper nature of pure, vast, blissful emptiness. But the barrier to that is that right now you're seeing the world as solid objects. But as soon as you notice that any perception is an arising and a passing, then the solidity of all objects, including the object, the thought form of I, they dissolve. That becomes apparent to be an illusion, and then you fall into the deeper nature of void or emptiness, and it's really a fantastically springy, energizing, exciting even experience. So if you're still with me, because this is very abstract, I applaud you if you're still watching and you still somewhat understand what I'm saying. Then how do I meditate on this topic, you might ask? Like, if I want to go sit down and see this for myself more and more and more clearly, what exactly do I do? And if you're interested, again, I highly encourage you to go look at Shinzen Young's videos, because he's been doing this for decades and he will tell you exactly how to do it. But just very quickly as a overview, what's worked for me really well is noticing the arising and the passing of absolutely everything you can. You don't need to notice it to its full depth at the start, but just notice every single perception has an arising and the passing. And that includes, for instance, judgments of yourself and of others. Resistance also is very contractive, so you might not want to go sit and meditate. You can notice, oh, that not wanting is also a sort of a contraction in the body. And it has all sorts of expansive and contraction aspects to it in the thought space, in the body space, in the sensation of feeling, in the sound space. It's like a conglomeration of expansion and contraction, this resistance of not wanting to meditate, but also just tension in the body. If you're unhappy, for instance, at work, you can sense that there's tension in your face, and that tension is also expansion and contraction happening. Also, if you have an aversion to something, that's also an expansion and contraction. If you have a conversation with someone else, you can notice all the aspects of expansion and contraction, which would, if it's a conversation, there'll be tons of that happening. And even when it's happening inside your head, it's very useful to notice the sort of conversations you're having with yourself. Again, you notice you notice and you allow the forms to happen, to affect each other, to play out, but you're noticing the deeper nature of the conversations, the expansion and contraction. And also beliefs. You're noticing that every single thing that you experience is an expansion and a contraction, and that includes beliefs. The very belief that you exist, the belief that you're sitting here, any spiritual beliefs you might have, any atheistic or materialistic views that you might have, even memories, all of that is expansion and contraction. So you're just breaking down absolutely everything you experience into arisings and passings. That's what really worked for me. And the best trick for me personally has been in terms of accessing this state on a deeper level than just the mental understanding. If you're still listening, you probably get what I'm saying, but there's a deeper level of really seeing the expansion and contraction happening moment by moment, very clearly, and on almost a pixel scale, not the big picture, but you can notice it almost pixel by pixel, frame by frame happening. And what's really worked for me lately very well to notice this in a sort of a profound way is through states of confusion. So this might be a bit paradoxical sounding, but if, for instance, you see something that you understand, for instance, to pick a silly example, you see a dog running down a road chasing a cat. That makes just sense to your mind. My mind just comprehends that, and that's concepts, which is fine. But if my mind gets confused, for instance, I see a dog chasing nothing down the road barking, that might put a sense of confusion in my head. So my mind is trying to create concepts that will fit what I'm seeing, but it can't create any concepts. So what's coming up, what's arising is pure arisal, and what's contracting is just abstract space. There are no concepts. So this is important. There are no concepts, no thought forms to distract you from the arising and passing of perception when you're confused. So I guess my takeaway for that is for you, the takeaway for you is, if you're feeling confused at all, don't see that as a bad thing. Immediately jump on that opportunity. If you're feeling confused, notice the expansion and contraction of this confused feeling, because for me anyway, confusion is almost a gateway to dropping the world of thoughts, the world of forms, and dropping deeper into the space of expansion and contraction, and dropping even deeper into the space of blissful, jumpy, springy, energizing ocean of consciousness. And yeah, another important thing to notice, if you are at all excited about this topic, then you can do this in daily life at any time. Maybe don't do it, for instance, if you're driving, because then you really need to focus, or if you're doing surgery on someone, don't do it then, just fully focus on what you're doing. But you can notice it as you're watching this video, as you're actually meditating, or as you're watching TV, or in a boring meeting at work. You can notice expansions and contractions at all times, and you can even notice it. It will be very interesting if you notice it when falling asleep. If you notice it the first thing in the morning when you wake up, that can be a very good habit forming exercise. And then even in your dreams, you can notice this. And now also I want to mention another aspect of it that's really helped me lately, or been really powerful for me lately, is to notice if you're just walking in daily life or going about your daily chores, is that what your mind is actually doing, usually the ordinary human consciousness, is you're fluctuating between obsessing about something in particular. For instance, your to-do list, you're obsessing, I need to do this and this and this. And then when you stop thinking about that, your mind sort of scatters and is in all directions, very fragmented. And then through this fragmentation process, it picks one fragment and then it obsesses again over that one particular thing. And through the day, you go through this loop of obsessing and scattering, obsessing and scattering, obsessing and scattering. But this itself is a great example of expansion and contraction, because when you're scattered all over the place, let's say if you're walking down the road, you're just not really thinking about anything, there's all sorts of sounds happening, your mind is very scattered. That's a very expansive state of consciousness. Then you might see a particular thing like a dog running down the road, and then you obsess over that. That's very contractive. Okay, so I hope that still makes sense. But now moving on to the next part is to say that this state is very pleasant. So it's very nice to drop into this state at all. But even more fulfilling than just the pleasant feelings is that it feels extremely purifying. to the nervous system when your insight drops to this deeper level of expansion and contraction. So, for example, a good example lately that happened for me was dropping this sense of disgust to the world, or to particular aspects of the world. So, for instance, if I would think of doing some chore that I didn't want to, let's just take something simple like taking out the trash. Through this practice, I noticed that, the taking out the trash, of course, incurs an expansion of visual space, me grabbing a bin and taking it out, but also there was an expansion of smell space in my body, which was one of disgust and like yuckiness. And through noticing that, I noticed actually that this arisal of expansive disgust is happening in many aspects of my life. It's the same flavor of expansion, the flavor of disgust, that is. And I would project that all into the world, for instance, at sounds I didn't like, at construction works that are noisy, even at people that I personally didn't want to associate with. And through noticing that all of this is expanding from the same place, on some deep level, it allows the nervous system to just drop it because it's making you unhappy to sense disgust all over the world. And you can drop 90% of it in a matter of a 10-minute meditation if you really see it happening. And next time disgust arises, you notice it, you're like, oh, I've seen this flavor before, and then you can just drop it. But I just recently had a breakthrough sort of with the flavor of disgust, but this could be with all sorts of flavors of existence, including like jealousy or anger, and also good things that can help you feel where is the other good aspects of life coming from, like gratitude, for example. If you notice gratitude coming up, it's really beneficial to notice it arising and then passing, because you'll become more aware and more familiar, build a relationship almost with this theme of gratitude arising. And when you know at a deeper level, where does this gratitude come from? It just flows out of you more easily. The resistance that your body, that your nervous system has to gratitude diminishes a lot. So I hope that makes sense as well. But then in time, if you keep practicing this, the reality of a no self will become more and more apparent. It'll become more and more apparent that everything is empty, and the real nature of reality is not these fourth forms, these ideas, these concepts, but it's a much deeper form of reality. And the last thing I want to talk about that I wasn't planning to, but that I really want to mention before I end, is sort of, I would call it the penultimate step to really dropping down into these deeper levels of consciousness, these ocean-like void spaces, which is if you're in a space of really strong equanimity where you're just accepting all arisings and passings. I hope I can do a good job explaining this off the cuff. A normal arising and passing might be, you can sort of imagine a tree growing and then falling over. That could be like a normal arising and passing. But if you have a really strong sense of equanimity, the arising is like a tree growing, and then the passing is actually like your consciousness going out to the tips of the leaves of a tree and then dissolving into empty space. If that makes sense, it's quite abstract. But you're being so allowing of an arising that it doesn't squeeze itself and turn itself out of existence and morph into some other fourth form. The energy isn't being recycled as such. The energy is being allowed to be itself so lovingly and clearly that it just dissolves almost like magic into the void itself. And then when that happens, you sort of just start to touch on, I'm just claiming for myself, just touching on the deeper sense of reality. And then that really fills your body with just excitement and this feeling that something really non-scary, really beautiful, really loving, is right in front of you. You're touching on it, and it's very blissful. I think it's the startings of nirvana, probably the startings of heaven, because every aspect of you is just happy. There is absolutely nothing wrong with existence at all. It's just perfection. Okay, but if you made it through this video, this extremely abstract video, then I applaud you. But if it's caught your attention, then please, I highly encourage you again to go look at Shinzen Young's videos. He has 2 YouTube channels that I'll link to. He goes over this topic in a lot of detail over many hours, and he'll give you much more structured ways to meditate on this topic. But I really hope that you follow through with it and that you have great success, because it could be the best exercise, the best meditation that you ever take up. And I wish you the best of luck with it.